Joining us now in studio to take a look at South Africa's reputation on a global scale is Dominick Heil. He's Managing Director at the Reputation Institute of South Africa. Dominick, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Just yesterday, Alex spoke to Clive Simpkins and he managed to give us an overall view of how the world is viewing South Africa at the moment. But your perspective, given the fact that we've got the Oscar Pistorius trial, the Nkandla report recently released, and the mining strikes that are ongoing.
Yeah, I think the mining strikes are not such a problem for us. What is much worse is the Oscar Pistorius story and the Nkandla story, because where South Africa's reputation is most vulnerable is in the area of safety and efficient governance. The government is not being seen favorably, and we are cementing those two perceptions around the world, and that's where our reputation is most vulnerable, and we're seeing that the big stories now hit straight into that curb.
Listening to your accent, it's quite clear that you're not from South Africa. So perhaps you're best positioned to tell us how internationals are viewing the country at the moment.
I feel like a vagabond globally now. I've been in South Africa for 20 years though,
wow.
And though I'm spending a lot of time in the UK these days, I travel a lot. I see a lot what people are saying. And it's quite clear that the outside perspective to South Africa is different to the inside perspective, for the very simple reason that when you're inside South Africa, you're worried about different things. When you look outside from South Africa, you see the things that we've just talked about before I came on stage here, is we actually have a well-functioning reserve bank. We have well-functioning financial institutions. And we have an economy that is doing okay given the turmoil that you have elsewhere in the world. If you're inside South Africa and you feel like the government's not looking after you, there's no security, you don't feel safe, that affects you personally, and therefore you're much more affected by those things. And people in South Africa are losing their emotional bond with their own country fast.
So quite clearly we're looking at the country from different ends of the scale.
Yes.
But if you could quantify the value of a reputation, how much would South Africa be worth?
I can't give you a number here sort of straight away, but reputations are worth a lot. They're worth billions. If you sell something and it says this is from South Africa, will people take that as a reason to buy it? Or will they take it as a reason not to buy it? And obviously these decisions have huge effects, whether people come as tourists, whether they want to invest here. Those are decisions that are made on reputation. What are your perceptions about the place? And so the reputation is worth a lot, and we should actually not see Nkandla as a 200 million problem. It's a multi-billion problem for the country.
That's a huge number.
That is a multi-billion.
Does the president know that?
He would know that. And that makes it even worse. I mean, in any normal democracy, if you have this multi-institutional meltdown that we're seeing, there would be no question that this government would no longer be in place today, given yesterday's news.
Yesterday, Alec asked Clive Simpkins to offer some advice to the President of South Africa. If you could share your words of advice for him, what would
I have given up on that because there have been so many moments where it would have been possible for the entire cabinet and for Jacob Zuma in particular to do the right thing, to come out to say, I'm transparent about this, I'm going to put things right, I will take the consequences for it. And he has never done this.
Do you believe that we're beyond that point now? Beyond repair?
We're absolutely beyond that point now. I mean, we do have a government that is not holding itself accountable to the basic democratic standards.
So how do we fix this, Dominick, if at all?
Well, we have an election coming up, and people have a choice. We have voted for this government, and I think people knew why they voted for the government. And I think there is a track record of the ANC in the past that for a lot of people justified voting. People really do need to make up their minds of who should take the country forward. I don't have a particular suggestion, but I sure think that it is now entirely unacceptable for any South African not to go to vote, because this matters now. If you're not voting, you cannot say, I'm a patriot, I am here for South Africa. Not to vote is entirely irresponsible. We do have various parties, people can vote, and they need to be aware that they have a voice, and this comes with a responsibility.
It's so interesting to hear someone who's only been in the country for 20 years, but you understand the cruciality and the importance, rather, of
I travel around the world,
forward.
and when I open my mouth elsewhere, they say, "Oh, I'm sure you want the pinotage, given the way you sound." So, I'm a foreigner with high local content.
Hey? You go for the mkomboti, not the pinotage. But perhaps
I'm very at home here.
Indeed, but perhaps, Dominick, if you could walk us through the private sector. We also see MTN together with Cell C having a public spat regarding the cutting of MTR rates, where Cell C says that MTN is not working in the interest of South African consumers, and MTN obviously defending their role.
Yeah, I think that companies need to realize there is a global shift happening, and people do not have time for companies going forward who they are not seeing act responsibly in their broader context. You have now a situation where the reputation of companies is declining overall, but at the same time we see that there are certain companies that are able to break out of that logic, and there where people are saying these companies are still doing things right. For a long time, Woolworths was a good example of that, and I suppose still is to a large degree. Had a few wobbles lately, but people sort of have a sense this is a company that looks after stakeholders properly. They're not taking anyone for granted. They're balanced. There's a relatively well-balanced business. That is what people are looking for. I think the issue with the strikes in the mining industries is actually not so much one of that people are saying, "Oh my God, there's a strike, that's terrible." Is that the strikes are actually a response to a complete lack of taking a holistic approach in managing those companies in a way that properly benefits everyone and that's communicated properly. I see a lot of thinking in the mining industry where you still have a sense we are 100 years behind.
Quite certainly, not only regarding operations, but in so many other aspects as well.
Yeah, you still have a lot of that colonial attitude that just has no place anymore.
But Dominick, quite clearly then it does mean that we need to fix the problem. We've identified it. We need to find a way forward. Does this not present an opportunity, or rather the efforts of organizations like Brand South Africa and the Homecoming Revolution, or even reputation management companies?
Yeah.
How can they capitalize on fixing this issue?
Well, there's no point in fixing it if we don't get the underlying the fundamentals right. We can't put lipstick on a bulldog here. We need to make sure that when the two things we need to get right is safety and an efficient government. If we do not get this right, actually any effort to manage this will eventually just backfire and make it worse, because then we are lying to the public, we're lying to the global community. To some degree, we don't have to lie because we are somewhere on the map. We're not one of those really problem countries that sort of where everyone just thinks, oh, this is entirely hopeless. But there are two issues that we need to get right, and right now we are getting worse there. And both do we need to hold the people accountable for who have done those things. In the Oscar Pistorius case, we need to be aware that it is not just an issue between Oscar and River. This is an issue where billions are lost for South Africa, because it hits us in a way that affects everyone ultimately. You may not immediately notice this in your everyday life, but people don't like it, and maybe we find this unfair, but the rand suffers from those kinds of things. If people don't have a sense there is substance in the country and we're building the country where it's necessary, the whole country suffers, and we're all affected by that.